All right, I'm the Flat Rate Master, and today we're going to update some tools I've had for a while, reviewed, maybe not have reviewed, but give you an update on them. First tool I'm going to update you on is these Mueller Cup Scrapers. Now these are a authorized copy of the Super Scrapers. They've been awesome. They haven't dulled. They still work just the same as they did the first time I used them. They clean gasket surfaces really, really well. These are my go-to scrapers. I rarely use my SnapOn or my Matcos anymore because I almost drop it. I use these unless it's an angle I can't get and have to get a long or something like that. But these have been awesome. All right, next tool I'm going to talk about is my SnapOn Tech Angle torque wrenches. Now I've got the little 1/4 inch one here, all nice and fancy, you know, pound, newton meters, etc., etc. It also does angle. I've got the older version of the 3/8, not metal, not the updated design, and I've got 1.5 inch, and they're awesome. I use these all the time. They're expensive as all get out, but well worth the money. Their electronic torque wrenches are the industry leader. And hopefully none of them break because I don't have a Snap-on guy, but they are awesome. All right, so just a heads up, the next tools I'm going to talk about are all Milwaukee. I've reviewed quite a bit of Milwaukee tools, and some of these I haven't talked about in a while. And one of them a bunch of people have asked about, so I figured I'd do a whole bunch of them. So the mid-torques. The mid-torques honestly don't get used that much anymore. Why? Because the stubbies. The stubbies get used and abused on a daily basis. The 1/4 inch, the 3/8, and the 1/2 inch are my go-tos. I use these literally multiple times a day. Very rarely do I have to take out something bigger. If I do, it's the full size or a breaker bar. But these are my go-tos now instead of lugging this one out. The big boy, flawless. Haven't had a lick of trouble out of it. Still works great. This, of course, is the 3rd gen with the 1 key. You know, just works every day. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it because, you know, it works. All right, the next 2 tools I reviewed a while ago and haven't really talked about them much since, but I will here. So, the hot air gun, the heat gun. Honestly, if you're in the field where you have to use batteries, you don't have power, this is decent. I don't have the cones for it, but I've heard that does make it better, but it eats batteries and it's not as strong as a corded heat gun. So not the greatest tool, not the worst tool. It does what it says it does. It just uses batteries. I mean, you can't expect it not to when it's basically a heating element and a fan, but not one of those tools that, you know, is a must-have. All right, the next tool we're going to talk about is the M12 soldering iron. This is the one I've gotten a bunch of questions about, and it is still my go-to soldering iron. I have 2 butane soldering irons, and yes, I have butane for them. I cannot tell you the last time I have actually used them. This is my go-to. Now, some people have complained about the tip melting, and I think part of that comes from the tip itself starting to unscrew and making poor contact with that. But I can't confirm that because that's just my suspicion, because you have to keep checking this. Before I use this tool, I do make sure the tip is tight, because otherwise it does tend to loosen up. For whatever reason, it does tend to loosen up. So I do keep that tight, but I have not had any of the head melting issues or anything like that. As you can see, I've got a little solder stuck right there that's dripped down. I can't say enough great things about this soldering iron. It heats up fast. Now, if you're obviously doing really heavy gauge, may not be enough. You may put a bunch of heat into it. The other thing that I tend to do when I'm doing a bunch of wires is I tend to turn this on and off because it does heat up very fast. I tend to put the heat shrink on, twist one wire together with the other wire, solder that, heat shrink it, move on to the next, rather than doing a bunch of bulk soldering at once. So I tend to do one wire at a time. Not as efficient as doing them all at once, but I found that a lot of times if you do a bundle of them, it's easy for you put too much heat into the bundle and you can shrink your shrink tubing too much. So I prefer to do as little heat damage as possible to the shrink tubing, so I do it one at a time. So that might also be why I haven't melted the tip or melted the base, is because I do tend to turn it on and off. Mostly to save my battery, but I did that anyway with soldering irons, with butane soldering irons, is I tended to put them aside on the holder and just let it sit there, but I kept it lit. With this, I've got a quick switch so I can just turn it on, turn it off, and it heats up pretty quickly. So that's how I do it. Can't recommend this tool enough. It is just awesome. Not the worst on batteries, but not the best. Now, if you're doing a lot of soldering, definitely get the bigger battery, but other than that, I can't say enough good things about the soldering iron. So one side note, since I know somebody's gonna comment about it, why am I wearing gloves? Because I use these tools and they're got dirt on them, and I don't want to touch my camera equipment with greasy hands. Thanks for watching. I am the Flat Rate Master.